Western uprising to it, and yet the power falls to the Muslim Brotherhood. How do you explain this channeling of power into the most extremist groups and the continuation of these terrible partnerships?
Yeah, again, you know, the easy thing is to say, well, it must be a conspiracy. There must be some ideological connection here. And there isn't. I hate to say this, but WikiLeaks does serve one purpose. If you go through all the collected WikiLeaks stolen cables and search for Freedom House, okay, you'll get the whole story of what happened. For about 10 years, Democratic and Republican administrations agreed that we had made a mistake in backing the Arab dictators in the Middle East, that somehow we had to make a transition to democracy. Well, during the Clinton administration and carried on the Bush, the idea was, you know, no more talk, let's do it. So we brought young people from all over the Middle East to Washington and trained them on how to use cell phones, the internet, you know, to organize demonstrations for a peaceful, nonviolent overthrow of their governments. And you'll see in the WikiLeaks cables that all these kids were told the same thing. All of the uprisings are set to take place in 2011. Now, we thought that if these young people were so capable as to overthrow all these regimes, they would certainly be capable of organizing a political group strong enough to win an election. On that part, we were terribly wrong. The kids were just incompetents. They only did half the job. And so the Israelis just shake their heads at us and go, how can you guys be so stupid? How could you overthrow the Mubarak regime but not have a solid, moderate democratic regime to take its place? Instead, we let the organized groups, the second-generation Nazis, if you will, who'd been organized for a year, they were superbly placed to seize power. We didn't see it coming. Our great intelligence services really dropped the ball on that one. Most of the time, it's 90% stupidity and 10% conspiracy. That's how the world of covert operations actually works. So, the Freedom House organization to train young people for a 2011 uprising was a well-intended mistake, because they had only planned for the uprising and not for the elections to follow. A huge mistake, and it may take decades for democracy to regain a foothold after the Arab Spring. You know, groups, these Islamist groups, believe in, you know, one man, one vote, one time. In the Palestinian area, we saw Hamas. Hamas came to power not because anyone liked them. They had about 20% of the vote normally. But everyone voted for them because they wanted to get the PLO and Arafat's people out because they'd stolen too much. But once Hamas was in office, they would never allow another election. And to this day, they haven't. I doubt that there will be another Egyptian election. Mm-hmm. And so we may have created a monster. But the funny thing is, dictatorships and groups like the Muslim Brotherhood only survived and thrived because of illiteracy. And they got away with all this pro-Nazi stuff, you know, during World War II and afterwards because the people were illiterate. Now television and radio and cell phones have changed all that. I mean, the people of Iran, who've been illiterate for years, have just learned that there's oil in their country. They want to know, where's all the money going? So there are more uprisings to come. In the long run, I'm betting that democracy will win, but the Arab Spring was a very clumsy but well-intentioned initiative.
Sure. Now, switching gears, tomorrow is the anniversary of the 7/7 bombings in London. We've got a short clip of you here from after 2005 on Fox News, talking about Aswat, supposedly the ringmaster of the attacks, being MI6 agent. Let's roll that clip.
They were headed by, the Captain Hook, the imam in London, the Finsbury Mosque, without the arm. He was the head of that organization. Now, his assistant was a guy named Aswat, Harun Rashid Aswat.
Who they picked up. Yeah.
Aswat is believed to be the mastermind of all the bombings in London.
On the 7/7 and 7/21, this is the guy, we think.
This is the guy, and what's really embarrassing is that the entire British police are out chasing him, and one wing of the British government, MI6, or the British Secret Service,
Right.
has been hiding him. And this has been a real source of contention between CIA,
Hold on, John.
Justice Department, and Britain.
MI6 has been hiding him. Are you saying that he has been working for them?
Oh, I'm not saying it. This is what the Muslim sheikh said in an interview in a British newspaper back in 2001.
So he's a double agent, or what?
He's a double agent.
He's
Yeah, well,
working
see,
for
this-
the... So he's...
Okay, and the clip goes on, but basically the British are protecting him because he's a double agent of some kind. The Americans don't know. They're trying to capture him. But there's the Justice Department. They're interfering again. They're letting this guy skirt by. What's going on with this case? I know you haven't followed up on it recently. I really haven't either, but it's still part of this larger pattern of why we're so entangled in the Middle East and what a tangled web all this stuff seems to be.
It's so hilarious. Here was a guy, Aswat, who was running from country to country, and the CIA would track him down, and they'd say, okay, to the local host country, please arrest him. And all of a sudden, the guy would slip out of their fingers. And the British Secret Service was literally moving him from country to country, one step ahead of the CIA. The British had made a deal with the devil. They had allowed a neutral zone for terrorist groups in the city of London. They could stay there and not be touched as long as they did all their bombings overseas, then there was no terrorism in London. The French, for example, French intelligence service was furious. They called it Londonistan, that the British had made a safe haven for Islamist terrorists. And finally, you know, it had to happen eventually. The Islamic extremists turned on the British and began bombings in London. And wouldn't you know, the guy behind it was one of the very people, Aswat, that had worked for the British. There's an American connection, too. Aswat was once sent to America to build up a terrorist base here. And I think it was up in Oregon. And the Justice Department authorized the indictment and arrest of everyone involved except Aswat. The guys above him and below him were on the indictment list. But he was never mentioned. He was just allowed to go free. So it's a lesson in how the world really works. A lot of people who are involved in the war of terror know that the Justice Department sometimes is on both sides of the war. We had an operation down here in Tampa where they're laundering stolen vehicles from the United States, and the expensive ones were being sent to Kuwait and Qatar to be sold for money for Al-Qaeda. But the vehicles were turned into car bombs to kill American soldiers in Iraq. I mean, we had the VIN numbers, everything was traced. And we had a bunch of agencies helping us, Secret Service and Customs and ICE. And the FBI came in and shut it all down. It was just too embarrassing. A lot of the people the FBI had recruited, like Aswat, were double agents. You know, right under the nose of the FBI, these guys had been building terrorist networks in America. One of the reasons the FBI didn't share information with the CIA and other agencies was because it was too embarrassing. There was one guy here in Tampa, Professor Sami Al-Arian. Everyone thought of him as a nice, genial Muslim professor, leader of the Muslim Students Organization. And my friends were telling me that he was one of the world leaders of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Islamic Jihad is the most violent terrorist group in Palestine, perhaps in the Middle East. And he was the head of it. And we had videotapes of Professor Al-Arian out at these fundraiser meetings, you know. Who will give me $500 to kill a Jew? I tell you, this money is only for killing Jews, not for our administration. So what I did was I donated $10 to Professor Al-Arian's charities and then sued him under Florida law to see where my money was going. Was it going for a charitable purpose or was it going for terrorism? Well, what happened is my complaint listed all of the classified information I'd been given access to and exposed Al-Arian as one of the worst terrorists in the world. And you know, local newspapers couldn't believe it. This was Sweet Sammy. And it turns out I was right. He really was a major terrorist. But He isn't in jail. He's just sitting up at his daughter's house with one of those ankle bracelet things on. He's supposed to be charged with criminal contempt unless he tells the grand jury exactly how he got the money. But his lawyers say he's afraid to because he knows he'll be killed. And he may be right on that point. The money was laundered through Saudi extremists. They had a whole network of places set up at 500 Herndon Road, certain road in Herndon, Virginia. So, 10 minutes after I filed my lawsuit against El Arian, the Justice Department finally raided the exact address, Operation Green Quest. And so at least in 1 hour, I closed down all the Saudi money laundering networks in America. But yeah, the Justice Department has been protecting the Saudis. We've been on both sides of the war against terror. That nonsense has to stop.
Now, today we have Eric Holder in the Fast and Furious controversy. He's been found in contempt of Congress. Is this probably the most public shame moment for the Justice Department and the Attorney General? What do you make of the whole Eric Holder Fast and Furious case, and what does it mean for the larger Justice Department?
As much as I dislike Eric Holder, he gets a green light on Fast and Furious. There is no evidence whatsoever that he even knew about it. This was started under a previous Attorney General, the Bush administration. But the Justice Department is saying, look, you can't see our internal correspondence. That's executive privilege. I think it's a big mistake that there should be no executive privilege where a crime is suspected. Now, I know that this time on Fast and Furious, it's nothing more than a political stunt by the Republicans in the House of Representatives, and shame on them for doing it. But I think that we should start looking behind executive privilege where clear and convincing evidence exists that the Justice Department itself may have participated in a crime under previous administrations, because the same rule should have applied to the Justice Department back when they were bringing Nazis into America. That was illegal too, but they never got touched.
Right, but that was the thing with the gun walking, was that Issa kind of brought out in the hearings that it was going on during Bush, and then suddenly they didn't want to talk about that anymore. And it's kind of that whole Iran-Contra pattern, and something tells me it just goes on and on.
Yeah, Issa now has backed off. He said, well, yeah, there really is no evidence that Holder knew. But we'd like to see the files anyway. Well, you can't have fishing expeditions. But yeah, Issa has now backed off remarkably because it looked like most of the evidence was going to point at Bush. I mean, George Bush was just this nice, genial guy who didn't have a clue. And the people around him did far more damage to this country than they realized. There are a lot of nice people in the Republican Party, but their leadership has sold us out.
Do you think the wiretaps are going to change the questions about Holder, prove that he knew more than we think he knows at this point, or?